Good afternoon. We are going to start with the next lecture now, metabolic liver diseases. Now this is a topic that is so vast and it's difficult to cover even in 1 hour. Because when I was actually preparing the slides, I realized that to talk on this, you actually need to write a textbook on metabolic liver disorders. There is Wilson's, there is galactosemia, glycogen storage, you name it, and any particular metabolic disorder we have to cover. Now, if you take metabolic liver diseases, initially in the, say 10 years or 20 years down the lane, we had very few cases of metabolic liver diseases being reported worldwide and very few from India. Gradually over a period of years with more diagnostic tests available, we are able to diagnose metabolic liver diseases more common. Worldwide, if you take common causes of pediatric liver transplant, biliary atresia always tops the list. Second would be metabolic disorders. Now they are forming 10% of the pediatric liver transplants worldwide, and more patients with metabolic liver diseases are now undergoing a liver transplant. Common causes of metabolic liver disease reported from India would be Wilson's, glycogen storage, galactosemia, your NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, Gaucher's, mucolipidosis, and hypertriglyceridemia. These are the common causes reported in India. What has been our experience among the metabolic liver disease? Common ones. We've seen all particular, maybe one case here, one case there. But Wilson's, I think we have around 20 or 25 children with Wilson's. Glycogen storage disorder, the last count that I had was around 18 patients. Non-alcoholic fatty liver, NASH. Tyrosinemia, we have around 4 kids with tyrosinemia. PFIC, we have around 10 or 13 kids with PFIC. Galactosemia, neonatal hemochromatosis. So these are the common ones. Obviously, you're going to see Gaucher's, you're going to see GM1, GM2, you are going to see mucolipidosis. All these you're going to see, but these are the common things that are there in India. Alpha-1 antitrypsin has not been reported as yet from India. So I don't think we are seeing alpha-1 antitrypsin in India as yet. PFIC was really underdiagnosed condition, progressive familial intrahepatic cholestasis. With the genetic test that we did, we realized that the incidence of PFIC is pretty high in Indian children. So though it was reported only in the Amish family earlier, the Jewish family, now we are seeing it increasingly there in India. What are the types of metabolic liver diseases that you see? Now liver is a source of a lot of enzymes. So either you have liver producing an enzyme and it's causing its effect elsewhere in the body, like your urea cycle defects or organic acidemias. They don't really come to you as a liver disease, they come to you more of CNS manifestations. So, but their problem is in the liver, because the enzyme is problem in the liver. Crigler-Najjar is another thing. Or you have an enzyme which is being produced by the liver causing a manifestation predominantly in the liver, but also affecting other organs, like your GM1, GM2. You have these, they come to you as hepatosplenomegaly, but they come to you as other manifestations also. Then you have certain which only affect the liver. Now which only affect the liver could present to you early in infancy, like tyrosinemia, galactosemia. Or you could have something which is affecting the liver, which is a genetic cause, a metabolic cause, but coming to you later in life like Wilson's or glycogen storage disease. Sometimes you could have a systemic metabolic disorder which is affecting the liver in addition, like alpha-1 antitrypsin or cystic fibrosis. They don't come to you predominantly as a liver problem. They are usually respiratory recurrent infections problem, and then you pick up a liver disease. So when should you suspect a metabolic liver disease? You should suspect a metabolic liver disease when you have a strong family history. A strong family history of somebody who's died, especially the siblings who died of a similar condition. I remember a child of Niemann-Pick disease where the parents had lost 2 children previously due to Niemann-Pick. They went ahead with a 3rd pregnancy. The antenatal enzyme analysis did show it was Niemann-Pick. I mean, a PCR test did show it was Niemann-Pick. Nobody counseled the parents that don't continue with pregnancy. They continued with pregnancy. And the 3rd child was also postnatally diagnosed to have Niemann-Pick. Okay, so if you have a very strong family history, consider a metabolic liver disease. Consanguinity is one thing that makes us strongly suspicious of metabolic liver disease. If you have a child who comes to you as recurrent episodes of jaundice, recurrent episodes of cholestasis, think of a liver disease, metabolic liver disease. Any child who has a liver disease with a mental subnormality, think of a MLD. Storage comes to you with just progressive abdominal distension, large liver, large spleen, no jaundice. Think of storage. If you have a large liver with jaundice, think of butt cheer. Okay? So if you have a large liver spleen without jaundice, think of a storage. Any child who comes to you with rickets, all the cases of tyrosinemia that we picked up were never picked up in the neonatal period. All the kids with tyrosinemia that we had were picked up because they had a hepatomegaly with knock knees. And they had acidosis, renal tubular acidosis, and they had deranged liver function tests. So any child who comes to you with rickets, failure to thrive, rickets could be a presentation of tyrosinemia, it could be a presentation of Wilson's, it could be a presentation of galactosemia. So when you have rickets and failure to thrive, think of a metabolic liver disease. Any child who comes with hepatomegaly and hypoglycemia, think of a metabolic liver disease. Now, how would these patients present to you? Either they come to you as acute liver cell failure and you picked it up. Wilson's may present to you as just an acute liver cell failure. You hardly get a Wilson's who comes to your OPD walking. Most of the times you pick up a Wilson's who's in an ICU. So they've come to you with jaundice, fulminant hepatic failure, there's a history of previous jaundice, or you find that the liver is very firm, ultrasound shows a cirrhotic liver and you know this is Wilson's. Or they come to you as Reye's syndrome. Elevated liver enzymes, hypoglycemia, acidosis, encephalopathy. So this is the presentation that they may come to you. They may come to you as just as altered sensorium as an encephalopathy. They may come to you as cholestasis, neonatal cholestasis, your PFIC, progressive familial intrahepatic cholestasis, your tyrosinemia, galactosemia. They can all come to you as just a cholestasis. A sick child, a neonate who's sick, think of hemochromatosis, tyrosinemia, galactosemia. Older child who's sick, think of Wilson's disease. Or you think of urea cycle defects or organic acidemias. Okay, so a sick looking child. And obviously a storage. So this can be the presentation. So either they come to you as fulminant hepatic failure, Reye's syndrome, they come to you as a sick looking child, they come to you as cholestasis, or they may come to you with a large liver and a spleen. Now, why does the liver damage occur in these metabolic liver disease? One, we know there's congenital deficiencies of the enzymes, which leads to either nutritional deficiency of something, or it causes accumulation of certain materials which are toxic. Like say in tyrosinemia, because there is an enzyme deficiency, the tyrosine levels will start rising. These tyrosine levels will form succinyl acetone, which is poisonous to the body, which causes the hepatocellular carcinoma. So you have a certain substrate that increases or certain byproduct that increases that causes the problem. And then they cause problems to your endoplasmic reticulum or various other tissues, or the various other organs in the body. So that's how the liver damage will occur. Sometimes, say in cases of neonatal cholestasis like PFIC, there is a transporter defect. The bile accumulates inside and the bile itself becomes toxic to the liver and causes damage and cirrhosis. So it can be a transporter problem also that can be causing the problem. So which are the metabolic liver diseases? Amino acid metabolism defects, bile acid synthesis and metabolism defects, that's your PFIC. Carbohydrate metabolism, GSDs, bile flow and excretion, bile acid synthesis defect, or your PFICs again. Mitochondrial function, so you have something like lactic acidosis, mitochondrial disorders, fatty acid oxidation defects. Peroxisomal defects, Zellweger's can come to you like this. Copper metabolism, Wilson's. So any of these metabolic defects can come to you as a metabolic liver disease. If you do a liver biopsy, will you pick up something on the liver tissue? Probably not. You may not pick up any structural abnormality in the liver, but there is a severe functional defect. So suppose if I did a biopsy in a tyrosinemia or galactosemia, I'm not going to pick up anything on a liver tissue. If I did a liver biopsy in a storage, I'll pick up the storage cells. So I'll pick up glycogen in case of glycogen storage. I may pick up storage cells in case of Niemann-Pick disease. So if I specific conditions, I may pick up something on biopsy, but otherwise, grossly, anatomically, structurally, the liver tissue will look normal. In a PFIC, if I did a liver biopsy, I may see abnormal looking bile if I did it on an electron microscopy, but otherwise the liver is not going to show me much except for cholestasis and bile duct paucity. You're going to see cirrhosis because the liver gets damaged. You may see necrosis, All these metabolic liver disease over a period of time may go into carcinoma. You may see tumors. And as I said, storage of lipid or glycogen or other manifestations that come as hepatomegaly. Now, this is a general approach to a metabolic liver disease. When to suspect, how do they present, what is the liver tissue in them, what are the various types of metabolic liver diseases, isolated liver, associated with systemic manifestation, systemic illness coming to you as a liver disease, so various manifestations. What I'm going to discuss now is individual metabolic liver disease that have been worldwide reported to be very common. Some of them may not be common in India, but I'm still going to discuss them so that you are aware about these conditions and you know how to manage these patients, probably identify, not manage these patients. Alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. As I told you, alpha-1 antitrypsin is not seen in India. Probably we are not picking them up, but it's not currently seen in India. Earlier, all patients with neonatal cholestasis, we used to do the alpha-1 antitrypsin levels. Subsequently, I've stopped doing it because we have not ever picked up alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. In adults, they come to a COPD due to deficiency of the circulating protease inhibitors, alpha-1 antitrypsin. In children, neonatal cholestasis, chronic liver disease and liver failure. It's an autosomal recessive condition, so 25% chance in the next pregnancy. You have various gene defects which cause various phenotypic variations. So if you have a PiZZ mutation, the circulating alpha-1 antitrypsin level is only 15%, whereas if you have a PiSS mutation, the circulating alpha-1 antitrypsin level is 60%. The liver disease is caused by the PiZZ phenotype. So if you have a PiZZ phenotype, how will they present? 11% of these will come to you as neonatal cholestasis. Rest of them will not come in the neonatal period. They'll probably come to you as later in life. Of those 11%, 25% will go into liver cell failure. Remaining 25% will go as chronic liver disease with cirrhosis, and 50% will recover. Okay? 6% will never have neonatal cholestasis, but they'll come as chronic liver disease. So most of the patients with PiZZ mutation will not ever come to you as a liver disease. Probably you'll pick them up as COPDs later in life. The pathogenesis is decreased export of mutant Z alpha-1 antitrypsin molecules from the hepatocytes. So this Z protein accumulates in the endoplasmic reticulum of the liver cells. They are PAS positive. When you do a liver biopsy, you pick them up as PAS positive, and they lead to hepatocellular death. So it's the accumulation of this abnormal protein that causes the death. Because it's a genetic problem, there's no specific treatment. The only treatment is actually liver transplant. Okay, and it also prevents the lung disease. Now, various centers who've done liver transplant in alpha-1 antitrypsin, 5-year and 1-year survival rate, almost same. So it's a very good outcome if you do a liver transplant. Just because you diagnose alpha-1 antitrypsin does not mean you immediately post the child for a transplant. There are certain scoring systems. You have a PEL score, you have a MELD score. The pediatric end-stage liver disease scoring system, or the MELD, which is for the adults. Depending on the scoring system, you decide when to post the child for a transplant. So you keep on following up these children, see the scoring. If they get a PELD somewhere around 13 or so, you know that the mortality is going to be high now. This is the time to post the child for transplant. So just because you diagnose alpha-1 antitrypsin does not mean transplant tomorrow itself. Transplant may be 5 years down the lane, 6 years down the lane. You keep on monitoring these patients. If we take cystic fibrosis, now all of us must have seen a patient of cystic fibrosis sometime in our residency or whenever we've seen a patient. We all know they present to us probably with recurrent diarrhea. They come to us recurrent respiratory tract infections. We've hardly picked up a neonatal cholestasis as a presentation of cystic fibrosis. One child recently I saw at Nanavati, neonatal cholestasis on day 2 of life, jaundice on day 2. All congenital infections were ruled out. Neonatal hemochromatosis was ruled out. That child on a screening had a CF positive. We are planning to send his Delta 508 mutation analysis. But probably this is the first child that I would have seen of neonatal cholestasis as a cause because of cystic fibrosis. Okay, it's that rare. We all know it's caused by the mutations in the CFTR gene. There are more than 1,000 mutations. The Delta F508 is the commonest mutation. If you don't get this mutation, it does not mean it's not cystic fibrosis. You still will have to check for other mutations, so sweat chlorides becomes important. Pancreas is involved and that causes the recurrent diarrhea. What happens in the liver? The bile becomes viscous and it causes biliary obstruction. So we always suspect cystic fibrosis when they have an inspissated bile in cystic fibrosis. And that leads to focal biliary fibrosis and ultimately cirrhosis. If these children survive into adolescent age group, almost 50% will have a liver disease. And then they would require a combined liver and lung transplant. You try to manage these patients, try to take them as far as possible without a transplant. So you try to keep them infection-free, bronchiectasis-free. In older children, you try to manage the liver problem as much as possible because the ultimate treatment would be a lung and liver transplant. You try to manage them conservatively as far as possible. Because the bile is viscous, the treatment would be ursodeoxycholic acid in these patients. Now let's discuss one case, because if I go too theoretical, you all will go to sleep. So this is one thing. This is a 10-month-old boy, jaundice since day 8 of life, and itching since 3 months of age, no clay-colored stools. He's presented to us at 10 months with a history of jaundice, neonatal cholestasis, without clay stools but itching. On examination, you find hepatosplenomegaly. At 10 months of age, when you investigate, he has a direct jaundice. Liver enzymes are high, GGTP is 30, alkaline phosphatase is high, cholesterol is okay. What do you think this child has? Look at it carefully. Direct jaundice, elevated enzymes. Can you interpret this GGTP? It's a low GGTP, low to normal GGTP. He's come to you with itching, with jaundice, right from onset of day 8. So there is an obstructive jaundice, but the GGTP is not high. That tells you there is something like a bile duct paucity or PFIC. What was investigated? USG, it shows sludge in the gallbladder. So it's not biliary atresia, there is a gallbladder seen. There is no portal hypertension. There was a splenomegaly in this child. The Doppler is not showing portal hypertension. HIDA is not showing biliary atresia. He's treated with cholestyramine for his itching, multivitamins for his cholestasis, and ursodeoxycholic acid. Those were the days when we couldn't do a genetic test. When he became 3 years of age, we sent his genetic test and that came positive for PFIC. He was PFIC type 1. So it's progressive familial intrahepatic cholestasis. So progressive familial intrahepatic cholestasis is a metabolic disorder. Neonatal cholestasis is the presentation. Most of these patients come to us recurrent jaundice, low GGTP, and they ultimately would go in for a liver transplant. This child died at the age of 3.5 years because he couldn't undergo a liver transplant. So progressive familial intrahepatic cholestasis, autosomal recessive. It's caused due to defect in the hepatocytic canalicular membrane transport. So it's a transport problem. There are two types, common ones, which have low to normal GGTP, type 1 and type 2. Type 2 is also known as bile salt export protein deficiency, BSEP deficiency, whereas type 3 is MDR3 deficiency, in which you get elevated GGTP. If you take type 1, Bailer's disease, it's also known as benign recurrent intrahepatic cholestasis, BRIC. BRIC is basically a benign variant of PFIC, whereas PFIC, when you label somebody, it's a very severe variant. It's caused because of mutation in the ATP8B1 gene. Intractable pruritus. These patients have pruritus which is so bad that sometimes nothing works. You may have given phenobarb, you may have given opioids, you may have given cholestyramine, nothing is working, and you may actually have to do a surgery just to relieve that itching. The itching is so bad they can't sleep. So intractable pruritus, you may have to do biliary diversion for that. They come to you as recurrent jaundice, failure to thrive, hepatosplenomegaly, and then ultimately they go on to liver cell failure. PFIC type 1, this gene mutation has expression even in the intestine, pancreas, lungs. So they can come to you as chronic diarrhea. They can come to you with recurrent wheezing. So PFIC type 1 is jaundice with recurrent diarrhea, jaundice with wheezing. And Even if you do a liver transplant, the diarrhea does not settle down. Okay, so diarrhea is one thing that, so PFIC type 1, most of the people actually try to avoid a liver transplant because the prognosis is not that good. So the gene is expressed in the hepatocyte, canalicular membrane, cholangiocytes, intestines, pancreas and other organs. There is poor biliary excretion of the bile acids with elevated serum bile acid levels. Your liver enzymes, bilirubin are elevated, but GGTP remains below the normal range. If you do a liver biopsy, your light microscopy is not going to be very definitive. But your EM may show coarse granular bile, wispy bile, it's called as wispy bile, and there is paucity of canalicular microvilli. Treatment is treat the pruritus, treat the cholestasis, urodeoxycholic acid, biliary diversion, and ultimately liver transplant. Now what happens with liver transplant? Prior to transplant, the excretion of bile acids was poor. So the absorption in the intestine was balanced. Post-transplant, there is normal biliary excretion of the bile acids. I told you intestines are also affected, but the intestines are not able to reabsorb them. So they tend to have a intractable diarrhea. And that's why most people will not touch a PFIC1 for a transplant. Type 2, which is also known as PFIC type 2 or BRIC2, BSEP deficiency, clinical phenotype similar to PFIC1 except that diarrhea is not a feature of it. It's caused by mutation in the ABCB11 gene. The product of this gene is BSEP, which is the principal canalicular transporter of the bile acids. Gene is expressed exclusive in the hepatocyte, so you don't have these diarrhea manifestation or wheezing manifestations. They have same elevated serum bile acids, intractable pruritus, cholestasis. Liver biopsy, instead of granular bile, you may see filamentous bile. These patients may ultimately go on to develop hepatocellular carcinoma. Treatment is biliary diversion and ultimately liver transplant. PFIC type 3, the MDR3 deficiency, very rarely reported. It's a defect in the canalicular phospholipid transport. Pruritus and jaundice with high GGTP. Onset is from any time in the neonatal period to come later in life. Liver biopsy will show extensive bile duct proliferation and periportal fibrosis. In mild disease, they just come to you as gallstones. So you should suspect PFIC type 3 in any patient who comes to you as recurrent gallstones. Now even after you've done cholecystectomy and the child still forms a stone, probably in the duct or something, you have to consider this entity, PFIC type 3. So if you have a recurrence after cholecystectomy, think of PFIC type 3 and the treatment is UDCA, urodeoxycholic acid. Liver failure, treatment is going to be liver transplant. Then we come to disorders of bile acid synthesis. There are 9 distinct types. It's a bile acids, you have a synthesis pathway right from cholesterol to chenodeoxycholic acid, cholic acid, so you have a pathway there. Any enzyme deficient in that pathway causes accumulation of all the toxic bile acid metabolites. And here the liver gets damaged because of accumulation of bile acids in the liver. Treatment here is actually cholic acid and not urodeoxycholic acid. So you need to have a cholic acid there and the treatment would be a liver transplant here. I'm not going into detail of bile acid synthesis defect because it's a pretty rare condition and you don't see it that often. What we'll discuss is Wilson's. I heard there was an exam question this time in the DND, gold standard for diagnosis of Wilson's. Most of the people wrote 24 hours urine copper, or most of the people wrote about liver copper content. The diagnostic is actually a genetic test. It's a defect in the ATP7B gene. Okay? You can't call it a gold standard because there are more than 200 mutations. So if you actually had to look genetically, you had to find out which mutation. You don't know which is the mutation common in India. So you're not going to, like cystic fibrosis, we are going to check delta 508. Here, more than 200 mutations. I did try doing genetic tests in 2 of our patients where parents wanted to go for another child. And we did send the samples to France for mutation analysis. Both children were Wilson's, but they could not pick up the genetic mutation in these patients. Okay, so it's not absolutely a gold standard. But yes, you could, if you picked up a mutation, you would be useful for you. Diagnosis of Wilson's is never 100%. It's always an amalgamation. You do 24 hours urine copper, serum ceruloplasmin, KF ring, liver copper. You cannot base your diagnosis based on one test. If 24 hours urine copper is high, you can't say it's Wilson's. If KF ring is positive, you can't say it's Wilson's. Okay, you need to have 2 or 3 combination to say probably this is Wilson's or a clinical diagnosis of Wilson's. What happens in Wilson's? There's failure of bile excretion of copper and incorporation of copper into ceruloplasmin. So this copper is going to accumulate in the liver and subsequently it's going to spill over. It's going to spill over into the cornea, the eyes, into the kidneys, into the brain. Okay. Now there is a classification of presentation of Wilson's. Wilson's is divided into 2 types, hepatic presentation and a neurological presentation. You have hepatic presentations which are known as H1 and H2. When do you call it hepatic? When there is no brain involvement. So H1 is acute hepatic Wilson's. Previously healthy child, comes like hepatitis-like illness, Coombs negative, hemolytic anemia, liver failure. This is the classical presentation I told you of Wilson's. We usually see of Wilson's for the first time in the ICU. Second is a chronic hepatic Wilson's, where suppose you screen the siblings. Siblings are currently asymptomatic, but you find that they have cirrhosis already on ultrasound and they have a chronic liver damage. The liver functions are abnormal. So you have an H1 or an H2 presentation of Wilson's. If you have a neurological Wilson's, any psychiatric manifestations, any adolescent who comes to your OPD drooling, psychiatric manifestations or chorea, first thing think of Wilson's. Okay? N1 is associated with liver disease. N2 is not associated with liver disease. And NX, where you have not yet investigated the liver disease. Okay, so that's how you diagnose neurological presentation. So hepatic is exclusive hepatic, there is no neurological. The moment you get neurological, you label them as N1. How do you diagnose them? KF ring, low ceruloplasmin, elevated urine copper, elevated liver copper on biopsy. Don't take diagnosis only on the basis of one. You will see a lot of autoimmune hepatitis which will come with elevated urinary copper. That does not make them Wilson's. Autoimmune hepatitis and liver copper somehow they tend to go hand in hand. Okay, so don't take only urinary copper as diagnostic of Wilson's. Sometimes your pre-penicillamine urinary copper may be normal and post-penicillamine challenge the urinary copper goes up. You need to have a difference of at least 10 times. So suppose you had a pre-penicillamine 40, then post-penicillamine it should at least be 400. If it goes to 200, it's not Wilson's. So at least 10 times elevated. KF ring can be present even with hemochromatosis. So it's not diagnosis only with Wilson's. And elevated liver copper on biopsy has to be more than 100 microns, okay, micrograms. So you can't say that it's only Wilson's on the basis of one test. Treatment is going to be chelation. First, remove all that copper, what is there inside. You have various chelating agents, D-penicillamine, trientine, tetrathiomolybdate. Now, when do you use trientine? When do you use D-penicillamine? We use D-penicillamine routinely. If you have a neurological Wilson's, if you use penicillamine, you may cause a flare-up of the neurological Wilson's. Those are the times you try to use trientine. We have one child on trientine. Trientine is not available in India. You have to order it from abroad. One box was going to cost you 30,000 rupees, which is going to last you only for a month. So it's extremely expensive medicine. Neurological Wilson's do very well if you start them on trientine. We had one child who had an extremely slurred speech. When we started on trientine, she did very well. Again, trientine has stopped. She's back on penicillamine, not doing that well. You may use zinc supplements. Zinc basically retards the absorption of copper from the intestines. So for chelating, zinc is not an agent. For chelating, penicillamine is the agent. Once you find that you've chelated well, copper has disappeared from the eyes, copper has disappeared from the liver, then probably you could keep the child only on zinc supplements. But till then, it's going to be penicillamine. Never use chelating agents in a child who comes with fulminant liver cell failure. It's going to worsen the child. It's not going to help the child. If the child comes to you in fulminant liver cell failure, the treatment is only transplant. Chelating agents are not going to work. When do you do a liver transplant? There is a King's College Wilson's disease prognostic index. Based on this scoring, again you decide about transplant. And preferably you should do it before the neurological manifestations arise. Neurological Wilson's almost becomes a contraindication for a transplant. Let's go to another case. This is a 2-day, day 2. Usually neonatal cholestasis, biliary atrasias, other causes, we don't see them coming to us at day 2 jaundice. They come to us with jaundice day 15 of life or day 20 of life. This is day 2 newborn, referred for deep jaundice. Born full term, birth weight 3.5 kgs. On examination he has hepatosplenomegaly. Deeply jaundice, no clay stools. You do a serum bilirubin 31. What's the likely differential diagnosis? One is hemochromatosis, anything else? Day 2. Is it congenital infection? With a birth weight of 3.5, little less likely to be a congenital infection. Any other metabolic liver disease? Galactosemia, tyrosinemia, hereditary fructose intolerance. So sepsis itself could be a cause of such high bilirubin. His TORCH serology was all negative. Blood and urine cultures were negative. HLH is one possibility. Okay? So HLH workup, triglycerides are normal, fibrinogen is normal. Day 3, these are the investigations. Hemoglobin normal, WBC count 26,000, platelets are 5,000. Bilirubin has gone up now, it's gone up to 41. 31.8 is the direct. Enzymes not very high. Albumin is low, there's coagulopathy now. You have a PT of 22.8, so almost an INR of 2. GGTP normal, serum ferritin is 3980, increased to 5400 after 3 days. Hemochromatosis. Serum iron is very high. Reduced transferrin saturation. So diagnosis is hemochromatosis. What's the treatment for it? Chelation, remove the iron. Phlebotomy, but the deposition is in the liver. It's not in the blood. Your hemoglobin is not high. 13 at newborn is normal. The deposition is not in the blood, it's in the liver. It's an iron storage disease. The iron is stored in the liver, the pancreas, endocrine tissues, even the heart. So if you actually have to pick up hemochromatosis, you do an MRI of the abdominal tissues, ask the radiologist to tell us whether there is iron in the liver, the pancreas and the spleen. It's often a fatal disease. Neonates present to you with very high serum ferritin levels, elevated iron saturation, low albumin, hypoglycemia, very high bilirubins and coagulopathy. The disease is maternally transmitted. It's actually an immune interaction, so you could also call it an alloimmunization. It's an immune interaction directed at the fetal liver. There's iron deposition in the heart and the pancreas by the MRI, or you could do a biopsy of the buccal mucosa and look for iron deposition there. Sometimes biopsy is difficult to do because they have thrombocytopenia, coagulopathy. They'll keep on bleeding from the biopsy site. So ultimately it's a diagnosis based on serum ferritin and iron deposition elsewhere. Treatment is going to be exchange transfusion, but it's not very useful. IVIG is the treatment, it's alloimmunization, so IVIG is the treatment. Because it's oxidant damage, iron deposition, so it causes oxidative damage to the liver, you give antioxidant cocktail. Deferoxime, vitamin E, selenium, prostaglandin and acetylcysteine, antioxidants. Prognosis is poor. It has a chance of recurrence in the next pregnancy. So if you have one child already with neonatal hemochromatosis, next pregnancy the mother should receive IVIG right from 18 weeks of gestation. She has to take monthly or weekly IVIG. That's the way that you'll be able to prevent it. Hereditary fructose intolerance, pretty rare in India. Probably we are not picking them up. Now fructose is metabolized in the liver by 3 enzymes, fructokinase, aldolase B and thiokinase. Hereditary fructose intolerance is caused by aldolase B deficiency. So it leads to accumulation of fructose 1-phosphate, which causes hypoglycemia and ultimately liver and kidney damage. Most of these patients are asymptomatic up to the time that they are weaning. So till the time they are on breastfeeds, they are asymptomatic. The moment the weaning is started, when they start introducing fruits in the diet, fruit juices in the diet, that's the time they start developing symptoms because of introduction of fructose in the diet. They have hypoglycemia after eating these fruits, vomiting, abdominal pain, lethargy. They go on to develop failure to thrive, liver disease, and rickets, renal tubular acidosis. Treatment is basically restriction of fructose, sucrose, and sorbitol. We have one child, I will tell you this child that we had. This child came to us at the age of 6 months with severe hepatic failure requiring ICU, diagnosed to have dengue, IgM positive, but was suspected to have an underlying liver disease because of intractable hypoglycemia and a large liver. This child metabolic workup was sent to various centers. One center reported it as tyrosinemia, which subsequently the other center said no, it's not tyrosinemia. Second center said this is carbohydrate glycosylation defect, which was again proved to be negative. Third center said this is Niemann-Pick based on PCR test. Okay, that also turned out to be negative. Subsequently, we had no diagnosis in this child, but we knew that there was a metabolic disorder. Mother said that every time she was giving fruits to the child, he was vomiting. So then we said, okay, probably hereditary fructose intolerance, just stop fruits in the diets and let's see. Currently, this child is doing well, but probably he may be hereditary fructose intolerance. Every time she gets fruits, oranges, he has this problem. Okay, so not all your metabolic screening that you send in a lab means that this disorder is there. I had one child who came to me with a very large splenomegaly at the age of 2 years with pancytopenia. I did a bone marrow biopsy, storage cells suggestive of Gaucher's. Labeled the child as Gaucher's, was advised enzyme replacement therapy. Child was lost to follow-up. At the age of 5 years, this child came back again as a completely neuroregressed, decorticating, decerebrating with still a large spleen. Apparently, the genetic test for Gaucher's came negative in this child. The enzyme test was positive. The genetic test was negative and subsequently the child turned out to be Niemann-Pick. Okay? So not necessary whatever test that you've done at the first instance is going to be the correct test. You have to follow up these children to actually see whether they behave that way. If they are not behaving, entertain a different diagnosis. Galactosemia. Galactose is not getting converted to glucose. Now, you have 3 types of galactosemia, type 1, 2 and 3. Type 1 is deficiency of gall, transferase deficiency. Type 3 is epimerase deficiency. And type 2 is galactokinase deficiency. Type 2 comes exclusively with only cataracts, there is no liver manifestation. Type 1 and 3 are going to come to you as liver disease. Commonest is going to be gall deficiency, epimerase deficiency is very rare. I remember we have only one child with epimerase deficiency. They come to you as jaundice, liver disease, lactic acidosis, renal tubular acidosis and cataracts. In the neonatal period, they are going to come to you as hypoglycemia, sepsis, especially E. coli sepsis, and a liver disease. If you leave them untreated, we had one doctor's child who came to us as neonatal cholestasis at 5 months of age. Elsewhere, he had been investigated everywhere except a urine-reducing substance was not done. When he came to us at 5 months, he already had cataracts. We did a urine-reducing substance positive. That child was already in liver cell failure with ascites when he came to us and he died. We had another child who's doing well, doesn't have galactosemia. But this is a preventable condition. So any neonatal cholestasis, please do a urine-reducing substance. Interpret it with caution because urine-reducing substance, every child with neonatal cholestasis is going to have positive. When should you suspect galactosemia? Neonatal cholestasis, failure to thrive. Sepsis, hypoglycemia, acidosis, and then evolving cataract. That's the time you suspect a galactosemia. Identification is very easy. You do the GALT enzyme. Treatment is going to be a galactose-free diet. Most of these patients should never ever go for a transplant. You should not reach this condition. One child of ours, he had cataract. He's undergone cataract surgery, removal of the cataract. He needs those glasses, doesn't wear. The child is doing well. He's only on bicarb supplements. Now the child is almost 3 years old. Doesn't have any metabolic, neurological manifestation. He's not mentally retarded. Liver-wise, he's absolutely fine. There's no portal hypertension either. It's just the renal tubular acidosis that needs to be controlled currently. So if you catch these patients earlier, they do very well with treatment. Storage disorder. I told you, I could just go on and on and on with metabolic liver disease and not help. But I'm giving you trailers, not the full movie. So glycogen storage disease which affect the liver, type 1, 3, 6 and 9. 6 and 9 also have systemic manifestations. Type 1 and 3 usually the liver manifestations. When would you require a transplant in a GST? Only if they develop chronic liver disease, cirrhosis, hepatic tumors, or they have unmanageable metabolic dysfunction. What are these metabolic dysfunctions? Hypertriglyceridemia, uric acid which is uncontrolled, hepatic adenomas, those are the problems. Type 1, glucose 6-phosphatase deficiency. There are two types, 1A and 1B. 1B is associated with neutropenia, so they come to you as with recurrent infections also. They come to you as with large liver, recurrent hypoglycemia, sometimes seizures because of hypoglycemia, early morning seizures, and they are short, growth retardation. Mental delay comes if they have seizures which were uncontrolled. Most of them have fasting ketotic hypoglycemia, elevated lactate, uric acid and triglycerides. Treatment is frequent feeding. You have to tell them give frequent feeds, have low sugar in the feeds because all that extra sugar is going to get accumulated in the liver. Extra sugar should only be given when the child has an episode of hypoglycemia or your glucometer shows a hypoglycemia. Nighttime feeding is very important, especially in younger children. Sometimes you need to give continuous nasogastric feeds. None of our children we have ever given continuous nasogastric feeds. We always tell them to drink cornstarch at night. It tends to maintain the blood sugar pretty well for at least 3 to 4 hours. Okay, so cornstarch feeding, low sugar content in the feeds, sugar to be taken only when child is hypoglycemic, and managing uric acid, managing the triglycerides, managing the acidosis. That's the treatment of glycogen storage. Keep on looking for hepatic adenomas and kidney damage. Fibrosis is not a feature of GST type 1. So if you did a liver biopsy and you found fibrosis in the liver tissue, entertain a diagnosis of type 3 and not type 1. But adults and older children will develop adenomas which can become malignant. So keep on doing ultrasounds regularly in these patients. These patients will ultimately also get kidney damage. So keep on monitoring their renal function tests and RTA. Type 3 is a mutation in the debrancher enzyme. So what happens is this glycogen that is stored is an abnormal glycogen. You have the bonds 1,4 and 1,6 bonds. So if your bond 1,6 is broken, 1,4 will accumulate. If 1,4 is broken, 1,6 will accumulate. So debrancher enzyme, abnormal glycogen is stored. That's the reason why this glycogen causes fibrosis in the liver. Type 1, normal glycogen is stored. There is no fibrosis. It's milder than GST type 1, but hypoglycemia can occur. Treatment is basically dietary and fibrosis is a problem. Muscle weakness in childhood is less, but ultimately as adolescents and adults, they will get severe muscle weakness. Type 4, cirrhosis without cardiac or neurological manifestation. So anybody who comes with cirrhosis in infancy, think of type 4. Mutation in the glycogen branching enzyme. That was debranching, this is branching enzyme. Again, the glycogen stored is an abnormal glycogen. So it's an abnormal unbranched glycogen which accumulates in the liver, heart, muscles, skin, intestines, brain, peripheral nerves. But most of these patients will die by 1 year of age with cirrhosis. 1 year, 9-month-old girl, abdominal distension since birth, no jaundice. On examination, hepatosplenomegaly with rickets, knock knees. What's the diagnosis? Why can't it be Wilson's? Why only tyrosinemia? 1 year, 9 months, you don't think of Wilson's, you think of tyrosinemia. Why not galactosemia? Why not GSTs? Galactosemias to go on like this without treatment would have died by now. So tyrosinemia. GSTs should have had a very, very large liver. Why can't it just be vitamin D resistant rickets? Vitamin D resistant rickets will cause the chest to become bell-shaped and the liver and spleen will come down. So you'll get a liver spleen palpable, and this could just be a vitamin D resistant rickets. So you do have a differential here. Your differential would be a metabolic liver disease. Your differential would be a vitamin D resistant rickets. This could be HIV with malnutrition. My favorite topic, no HIV. HIV has to come. So this is HIV with malnutrition. This child's vitamin D levels are normal. Liver functions are abnormal. BBG shows acidosis. HIV is negative. Urine amino acidograms shows tyrosine. Alpha-1 antitrypsin is high. Alpha-fetoprotein is high. So diagnosis is tyrosinemia. Tyrosinemia type 1. Then you have a transient tyrosinemia of newborn, which is a different entity completely. Type 1 is autosomal recessive disorder. There is a defect in the fumarate acetoacetate hydrolase enzyme, which causes accumulation of fumarate acetoacetate, which gets converted to succinyl acetone, which causes hepatocellular carcinoma. So this is the enzyme pathway that you can see. Tyrosine gets converted to phenyl pyruate, which gets converted to fumarate acetate, the last step, fumarate acetoacetate. This enzyme is blocked, and that's why you get an accumulation of a byproduct, which is succinyl acetoacetate, which is the one that causes carcinoma. Presentation in newborn period, neonatal cholestasis with liver cell failure. Older children, chronic liver disease with renal tubular acidosis. Still older children, hepatocellular carcinoma. Sometimes they may come to you as porphyria-like episodes, because in the earlier slide I showed you that it inhibits the conversion of delta amino levulinic acid into porphobilinogen. So you may get porphyria-like episodes. Treatment, NTBC. NTBC is the treatment. Transplant is only if this treatment fails. Then you go for a transplant, or the child develops hepatocellular carcinoma, then you would go for a transplant. So this is a child that we had 2.5 years. We diagnosed him as tyrosinemia. We put him on low phenylalanine, low tyrosine diet. This child also had renal tubular acidosis, so was on supplements with potassium and bicarb. Alpha-fetoprotein in December 2011 was 4,311. Urine succinyl acetone was high. So that tells you I have to aggressively look for cancer in this child. In June 2012, alpha-fetoprotein is 4,599. By the time we procured NTBC, NTBC again is not available in India, we have to get it from abroad. By the time it was September 2012. In December 2012, his alpha-fetoprotein rose up. On treatment, the alpha-fetoprotein should come down. His alpha-fetoprotein went up. So definitely now he was harboring some cancer. We did his ultrasound, it showed a focal lesion in the liver. Biopsied it turned out to be hepatocellular carcinoma. Subsequently, this child underwent a living donor transplant. Father donated the liver, he is doing extremely well. Now this child is almost 5.5 years. His problem is only the knock knees, which are also getting corrected with just the calipers. We don't need to undergo any surgery for that. So there are other lot of liver tissues that are there. Liver, metabolic liver disease, mitochondrial disorders, urea cycle defects, methylmalonic acidemia, propionic acidemias, MSUDs, primary hyperoxaluria, Crigler-Najjar. All these have a problem in the liver. Enzyme is in the liver. The problem is not in the liver. Manifestation is not in the liver. The manifestation is elsewhere. Niemann-Pick type C, lysosomal, come with liver disease, porphyria. Okay? So, I'm going to end here. Thank you very much.